Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of RPGs with Paddy. I'm Paddy. Today we're going to look at the Keeper version review of the Golden Dawn sourcebook by Pagan Publishing. Before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe. So let's get started. This book is separated into three main sections: the resources, the scenarios, and the appendices. We've already looked at the appendices because these are mostly for players, so you can check that out in my player review. But a lot of what is contained there is also contained in the resources. The scenarios will each get their own video, and there are 4 scenarios. And so this video is going to look at the resources section. Now, there is a large part of the resource section talking about the history of the Golden Dawn. And wow, is it complicated with a lot of infighting and backstabbing and intrigue. So I'm going to take that part and make another video describing that in detail rather than filling this up with too much fluff. So this video will deal with everything else in the resource section, just not the history of the Golden Dawn and the personalities involved. So let's get started. If you are a player, this is not the worst one if you're going to break the spoiler warning. But again, it is usually better to leave this to your keeper and not look at the secret information here. As I said, it's not the worst offense if you do it for these, as there's not huge spoilers here as well. But anyway, let's get started. In the first section, we get a brief overview of Victorian London, and this was written by William A. Barton, who is the writer of the original Cthulhu by Gaslight. So it should be no surprise that this section is very reminiscent of the Cthulhu by Gaslight. However, it does feel a bit rushed, as it's reduced down to about 2.5 or 3 pages. It's a handy overview that you could easily give to your players, but if you want more in-depth information, I would definitely recommend checking out the the Cthulhu by Gaslight first, second, or third edition. The third edition is the most readily available, so I would go with that. This one doesn't give you a huge amount, it's just a quick reminder. After that, we get a piece by John Tynes of Delta Green fame, describing what will and what won't be included in this book. Basically, it says that we won't be getting information about how to actually perform the Golden Dawn rituals, instead focusing more on the personalities involved in the Golden Dawn. And Tynes points out that this should be seen as a narrative structure for playing Call of Cthulhu in the Victorian era. The Golden Dawn kind of helps the narrative by giving the players a reason why they would be working together despite their different backgrounds, if they're all members of the Golden Dawn. If you want to know more detailed information about this, about the rituals, they recommend checking out Israel Regardi's The Golden Dawn, because it's basically a do-it-yourself Golden Dawn. But they also point out this information might not be so great for role-playing. Maybe 1 or 2 rituals might be interesting, but it can kind of block the role-playing as well, if not everyone knows how to do the ritual. But you could add something in. But this book won't include any information on that. So after that, we get the Keeper's history of the Golden Dawn, pointing out that there's also a player's version in the appendices. We start off with the origins, the structure and the grades, the growth and conflict, and all of the infighting that lead to the revolution and the eventual downfall of the Golden Dawn. As I mentioned before, I will discuss this in detail in my next video. The following section is a timeline of the Golden Dawn, and essentially just breaks down the events from the previous section and make it a little bit easier to look up. This will be helpful to keepers running the adventures, as they are set between certain time periods of the Golden Dawn. So you can quickly look at the timeline and see, okay, this has already happened, but this hasn't happened yet. And it's also useful to know who is in power and what's going on at any given time. The next section again rehashes a lot of the information from the history of the Golden Dawn, but this time it focuses on the personalities. So there is a lot of repetition in this book. We get the timeline, we get the history of the Golden Dawn, then we get the timeline of the Golden Dawn, which is a summary of that, and then we get the personalities of the Golden Dawn, focusing on how they interacted with, the history of the Golden Dawn. So there is definitely a lot of repetition, but it's actually good. The summary, the timeline, helps you find something quickly, and reading the history and then the personalities helps you kind of understand it a little bit better, because, as I said, there's a lot going on. Anyway, we are introduced to three secret chiefs: Dr. William Wynne Westcott, Samuel McGregor Mathers, Dr. W.R. Woodman, and then we are introduced to three major members: William Butler Yeats, Annie Horniman, Florence Farr Emery. Four prominent members: Frederick Lee Gardner, Dr. Edward Berridge, Alan Bennett, and of course the infamous Aleister Crowley, who was only kind of a member in the very later years of the Golden Dawn. And finally, three minor but notable members in J.W. Brodie Innes, Moyna Mathers, Samuel Mathers' wife, and A.E. Waite. So again, I will go into more details about the personalities and how they interact in the history of the Golden Dawn in my next video. But the next section tells us about the various meetings and meeting places. And the most important of these are the temples and the vaults in London. So it goes through a list of the temples. Temple number 1 is Fräulein Sprenger's original temple in Germany. Temple 2 lost some important manuscripts and kind of stopped being a temple. So the ones that are important for us, although I guess Temple 1 could come up and play. Temple number 3 is Isis Urania in London, which is the biggest temple, and it has about 100 male members and about 80 female members at its peak. The leadership of this temple kind of changed and was contested over time, as you will see if you watch the detailed history video. The next temple to be set up was Osiris, temple number 4 in Somerset on the Severn River. This was just a small group of men, and it didn't last very long. It was run by Benjamin Cox, but when he died in 1895, I think, the temple essentially stopped being a temple, an active temple then. Temple number 5 was the Horus Temple in Bradford, and this was the most successful after the London Isis Urania. It had about 50 male members and 10 female members, and one T.H. Pattinson was in charge there. Up next we have temple number 6, which was Amun-Ra up north in Edinburgh in Scotland, and this had about 30 men and 20 women, and the leadership and the power changed hands a few times as well. Temple number 7 was Ahatur Temple in Paris, and this was set up by Mathers and his wife when they moved over to Paris. But it was fairly small, and it only had about a dozen members. So the other main location of interest was the vaults in London. So some of the most important rituals for the inner order were performed here, and this is where they had a Rosicrucian style coffin, their secret libraries, where they created talismans and wands, and where they did a lot of their rituals. And it actually moved around to a few different locations, always keeping that location a secret. So only the inner order knew of it, and only certain people knew, probably all of the inner order knew where it was at any given time. So up next we get some information about the library, which was stored in the vaults. Just before I say that, we don't actually get so much information about the various temples as to what would be there. But yeah, you can just imagine any kind of slightly larger hall, basically, that could hold enough people to do the ceremonies. But it wouldn't have, for example, the secret libraries, which were kept in the vaults. So throughout the book, we are reminded that the Golden Dawn rituals and Cthulhu magic spells are not connected. Therefore, the list of tomes here are suggested to only give occult bonuses when read, not Cthulhu Mythos bonuses. And this could be a little bit frustrating to players used to playing Call of Cthulhu. Sure, there's always books that only give you occult bonuses, but here we have a list of about 20 tomes, the lesser works and the greater works, and none of them give Cthulhu Mythos bonuses. They only give occult bonuses. Now it does make sense as well, because the Golden Dawn in itself is not a Cthulhu Mythos organization. It's an occult organization. But a slight disconnect there as well, and the players might feel a little frustrated. But once you get into the inner order, so all the players should start in the outer order, and once you level up to the inner order, you will gain access to these secret tomes and you'll find occult knowledge. As well, there are no spells in these books, apart from possibly having the summon or bind astral parasites, which are a creature described later. So we are presented again with 11 lesser works, such as the magical ritual of the Sanctum Regnum, the real history of the Rosicrucians, and Egyptian magic, just for an example. After that, we get 9 greater works, like the Book of Sacred Magic of the Abramelin the Mage, the Key of Solomon, and the Zohar. So all of these are real works that you can still get. There's only one that I saw I couldn't find online. So it might be interesting to get your hands on some of them, but absolutely not necessary. But sometimes it's fun to read into the more occult side as well. We do get a very brief explanation of the greater works, but not of the lesser works. So, for example, and I'll just put this up on screen as well as I read, Isis Unveiled by Madame Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, 1877, +2 occult. Blavatsky's first book on her theosophical teachings. Isis Unveiled consists of 2 volumes totaling 1,300 pages and discusses many of the same topics as the above work, referring to the Secret Doctrine, which is just above. So some of these books are written by Golden Dawn members or other personalities the players may meet, so that can be kind of interesting as well. So we also learn about the special cipher used by the Golden Dawn, and I'll pop it up on screen here. I think this will be fun for the keeper and the players to have secret codes between Golden Dawn members. But I was surprised that there is not a website, or at least not one that I could find, that would write the cipher for you. There's many websites that will do a letter transposition for you, or something like that, but I couldn't find one for the Golden Dawn cipher. But also it's important to note that there is no translation for the letters J, V, and W, so just try to avoid them. It's a very simple replacement cipher, so each letter of the alphabet is replaced with a symbol. So after all of this, we finally get a little bit of gameplay information. So it spells out how players can spend points to buy into certain levels of the outer order. And the keeper is advised that the players are limited to the outer order for the start. If you want to buy contacts, you can spend points for that. 1 point will get you 1 contact, and there's a 50% chance it will be an ally or an enemy. 2 points gets you 2 contacts, 1 ally and 1 enemy decided. 3 points gets you 1 ally, 1 enemy, and a 50% chance of another ally or another enemy. So this sounds like very high odds for having an enemy, but once you find out about how much infighting happens in the Golden Dawn, you'll understand. It also makes for good role-playing to have helpful and unhelpful NPCs. And then we also get some input on how players can increase their level in the order and how much time it takes, how much study time. And after that we get a breakdown of the different Golden Dawn skills that the players can spend points to improve. Alchemy, astrology, cartomancy, which is like reading cards, kind of like tarot style. Esoteric languages, geomancy, which was originally trying to find water in the ground but is used kind of as fortune telling. And Golden Dawn members should also create a motto, probably in Latin, but other options are available. All of this is keeper information, but it's very, very similar to the player version in the appendix. There's just a little bit of extra gameplay mechanics included here. The next section deals with the Inner Order curriculum. Again, we get a breakdown of the grades and the titles, how to level up, etc. And we talk about the new skills like advanced astrology, advanced cartomancy, but also things such as wand creation and talisman creation, along with spirit visions, which is kind of like a spell, and astral travel, again, kind of like a spell. Again, this is almost exactly the same as the player version in the appendices, but it just has a little bit extra mechanics added in. So the player version is looking at it from like a knowledge point of view, and then the keeper gets the knowledge plus the actual game mechanics as well. Up next we get some information about the astral plane and how to travel it. Basically, the astral plane is a plane existing parallel to the real world. We can't see it or interact with it, but if we meditate or use astral travel, our spirit can then travel on the astral plane. The body remains in the real world, and your spirit can actually see it. But there are a few things to keep in mind in the astral plane. Basically, no Call of Cthulhu spells should work here. Any sanity that you lose from seeing horrific creatures in the astral plane is treated normally. But any sanity you lose through astral plane means will only be applied once your soul returns to your body. So while you are traveling in the astral plane, you will have to do certain things that cost you sanity. But you don't lose those immediately. You only lose all of them at once when your soul returns to your body. Your spirit returns to your body. And then there's a huge loss of sanity. And this is to represent the kind of the mental strain of kind of separating your soul from your body, your spirit from your body. So you can lose sanity from things like traveling in the astral plane or exerting your will or fighting as well. If you want to travel, you can do instant or gradual travel. Gradual travel is just moving basically. But really you will probably need to use instant travel. If you know the person that you want to travel to, you'll make a simple contest, and it will cost minimum sanity, and instantly you'll be transported to their vicinity. If you know the person less well, it will be a difficult challenge. So a higher level of difficulty and higher sanity loss, or risk of sanity loss. And again, if you don't know that person at all, it will be complex. So there's 3 levels. There's simple, difficult, and complex. And I use the word person very loosely as well. You can use this for any creature as well. While in the astral plane, you might be confronted with a random encounter with a Hound of Tyndalos, or other mythos or other creatures like the Migo, or an astral parasite, and they give us some stats for astral parasites here. For combat, with creatures or other spirits, only three things matter. POW, int, and MP, your magic points. Int basically works for initiative. MP is basically your hit points. So your magic points work as your hit points. And POW is how combat is done. Basically, there is a POW versus POW struggle on the resistance table. And when a defender fails to resist, they lose 1d3 magic points and 0 or 1 point of sanity. So there's also some comments on perceiving the real world while you're in the astral plane, moving around in the real world, and also communicating with, people in the real world. The astral plane is important in a couple of adventures, particularly the introductory scenario, The Room Beyond. But it is kind of clunky, and the first time players go into the astral plane, they likely won't be aware of the huge sand hit coming when they return to their bodies. It's a lot of rules for something the players should be doing sparingly. And you also can't do astral travel until you're at least in the inner order and have taken some points in that skill. So it's only available at the higher levels of the Golden Dawn. But it still takes up quite a large portion of, well, it's maybe the biggest rule that's introduced here. I'll just point out briefly, The Room Beyond is an introductory scenario, but they have a way around this as well. That you don't have to be in the inner order. So in the penultimate section, we get some information about the legend of King Arthur. They acknowledge the liberties that they have taken with history to make it more suitable for Call of Cthulhu role-playing. However, it also points out that King Arthur of the stories has almost no factual or historical data to back it up. The legends were fabricated, not exaggerated stories. Obviously, as legends grow, there might have been a kernel of truth to, say, the lady in the lake. It might have been a lady sitting by the lake who gave him a sword or something like that. But actually, a lot of these stories seem to be just totally fabricated by French bards centuries after King Arthur, the man who was King Arthur, existed. But after this, we are given some common knowledge before learning the darker truth. And the darker truth was that King Arthur worshipped Sheila na Gig, or Sheila na Gig. There's a little bit of confusion about the pronunciation there. But this is a real-life kind of concept, prominently in the Celtic regions, which is this woman possibly promoting fertility, but that's in doubt as well. But in this game, it focuses on fertility because it's linking Sheila na Gig or Sheila na Gig to Shub Niggurath, the fertility goddess. But anyway, after his death, his knights carried his body away, and they pretended to bury him at Avalon, as the legend goes, but really they brought him to Oak Wood because of its magic. They built a small chapel over his burial site, and then they went about spreading the word of Arthur's chivalry and wisdom and good deeds. But Arthur's enemies soon found out about the resting place, but they were worried about digging him up in case he were resurrected. So they constructed an enormous elder sign around the forest, so that even if Arthur were revived, he could not leave that area. After that, we get a little bit of kind of more recent stories since, the legend of Arthur. There's a story very similar to Ramsay Campbell's Inhabitant of the Lake, and when I say story, it's a half page paragraph really. If you haven't read Inhabitant of the Lake, I definitely recommend it. It's excellent. But basically, a Golden Dawn member, Randolph Northcote, found out about the burial place of Arthur and set about trying to revive him. He did some research, he found the site, and he dug Arthur up, carrying his body to the edge of the forest. But at this point, the elder sign kicked in and the body started convulsing and screaming. So Northcote brought him back inside. Now, Northcote wants to revive him and bring back King Arthur. Arthur, however, is from a different time, and this will cause some problems. Maybe their goals don't line up quite as well as he had hoped, as Northcote had hoped. And this is dealt with in later scenarios. So that is pretty much all of the information that we get in this section, and the resources section. After this, we move on to the 4 scenarios in the book. Now, a large part of this book is the history of the Golden Dawn, and as I mentioned before, it is long and complicated, so I didn't want to confuse this video too much. So for that reason, the history side will be presented in the next video, so feel free to watch that. It's not essential for Golden Dawn playing, but it is useful to know what's going on in the background there. So apart from that, my next video, apart from the history, will be looking at The Room Beyond, which is the introductory scenario for this Golden Dawn book by Pagan Publishing. So that is the end of the video. If you liked it, if you got something from it, please remember to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Okay, have a great weekend, everyone. Bye.